Are you struggling with modal verbs? Do you keep using the wrong one in certain situations? And do you have the feeling that you don't really understand what they actually mean? Well, this is because you've never ever gotten a complete and comprehensive overview of what they actually do. Until now. Stay tuned. Tag an alle, my name is Florian. I have been a German teacher for the past 8 years, and sometimes I like to put myself in the shoes of my students just to see how it is to learn German. And it is a battlefield of incomplete and wrong information out there. I'm not gonna shame anyone, but I really felt the urge to make a video that sums up and clarifies everything there is to know about modal verbs. So let's quit the babbling and jump right into it. What is a modal verb? Well, first of all, it's a verb. I know, shocking, and so it behaves like one in a typical sentence. You usually see it in the second bracket of a sentence, modifying another verb, but more on that later. As the name suggests, a modal verb expresses modality, and modality is the linguistic term used to describe the relationship towards reality or the truth. And let me be a bit less academic here. Modal verbs describe stuff like, and I made a list for that, likelihood, ability, permission, request, capacity, suggestion, obligation, necessity, or advice. There are many more, but these are just a few to give you the general idea. But it's not like you don't know them already. In English, modal verbs are words like want, can, must, should, may, or might. Now, you have to understand that it is really important to know what modality a certain modal verb can and what it cannot express. Big differences can also frequently occur between closely related languages, including German and English. However, these two share quite a lot of modality. The age-old joke, can I go to the bathroom? Oh, I don't know if you can, but you may, also works in German. So what I'm going to do is go through all the modal verbs, show you their conjugation, and most importantly, highlight the essential differences whenever there are some. Let's get started. In German, there are 6 true modal verbs, with one of them kind of falling out of use already, but I'm trying to not get ahead of myself. More importantly, all true modal verbs have the same 3 things in common. They do not require zu, unlike other regular verbs that are used in an auxiliary way. It's just modal verb plus infinitive. They are irregular in their first, second, and third person singular, and the third person singular is always identical to the first person singular. So the first verb we're going to cover today is wollen, and here's the conjugation. Ich will, du willst, sie es will, wir wollen, ihr wollt, sie wollen. Now, 99% of all cases, to want is the most accurate translation for wollen. But let's take a look at the modalities. There might be some surprises. Number 1, a strong desire or intention to do or achieve something. Sie will die beste Ärztin ihrer Stadt werden. She wants to become the most famous doctor in her city. Vegetarier wollen kein Fleisch essen. Vegetarians don't want to eat meat. Willst du später einmal Kinder haben? Do you want to have children one day? Ich will den ganzen Tag im Bett bleiben. I want to stay in bed all day. Now, some of you might already know the word möchten, would like to. And yeah, you can use that one with each of these sentences too, but it doesn't really convey the same determination as wollen. Möchten is much weaker in its purpose, but I'll get back to that later. Number 2, personified resistance of inanimate objects. Okay, sorry, that was way too academic. All I want to say is that you can use wollen for things or objects that don't want to change their state no matter what you do. They kind of have their own will you have no control over, and thus you overwhelmingly use this modality in negative clauses. You'll understand what I mean when you see the example sentences. Es will einfach nicht aufhören zu regnen. It just won't stop raining. Der Kurs will seit Wochen nicht steigen. The share price hasn't been going up for weeks. Der Motor will einfach nicht anspringen. The engine just doesn't want to fire up. Die Kopfschmerzen wollen einfach nicht weggehen. The headache just doesn't want to go away. As you can see, in English, this is mostly conveyed by will, but want is also an option in many other cases. Number 3, a formal and very indirect request or suggestion to do something. Now, this is used much more sparsely than the first 2 ones, but it can have its benefits from time to time. Also, the English translation varies depending on the formality of the setting. Beim Investieren willst du nicht alles auf eine Karte setzen. When investing, you don't want to or shouldn't put all eggs in one basket. Angehörige wollen sich bei der Friedhofsverwaltung melden. Relatives may want to contact the cemetery administration. By the way, this example is from a real sign. Seien Sie vorsichtig, Sie wollen nichts überstürzen. Be careful, you don't want to rush anything. Du willst immer einen Plan B haben. You always want to have a plan B. Now, there is one more thing to say about wollen. If you want somebody to do something, you can't really translate that directly to German. Ich will dich das zu machen is a typical mistake made by English natives. So here's how we do it in German. Ich will, dass du das machst. I want that you do that. You basically use wollen with a das subordinate clause instead of a direct object. Er will, dass ich früher komme. He wants that I come earlier, literally. So keep that in mind. Alright, let's cover the second modal verb, können. First, the conjugation. Ich kann, du kannst, er sie es kann, wir können, ihr könnt, sie können. This verb is mostly translated to can, to be able to, or to know how to, but some modalities might surprise you. Let's start simple though. Number 1, the ability or capacity to do something. This is the most basic and frequent use of können. For example, ich kann dir bei den Hausaufgaben helfen. I can help you with your homework. Er kann 20 Kilometer ohne Pause laufen. He can run for 20 kilometers without a break. Ihre Eltern können manchmal sehr streng sein. Her parents can be very strict sometimes. Kannst du deine Finger bewegen? Are you able to move your fingers? This capacity can also be occasional, as shown by the third sentence, but we tend to not overuse that one. Number 2, knowledge or learned ability. Pretty straightforward, a skill you have acquired through learning, which is much more specific than a general physical ability. Thus, this one is often translated as to know how to do something in English. Sie kann fließend Französisch sprechen. She can speak French fluently. Viele Menschen können nicht schwimmen. A lot of people don't know how to swim. Mein Vater kann Motorräder reparieren. My father knows how to repair motorbikes. Viele Kinder können früh Fahrrad fahren. A lot of children know how to ride a bike from an early age. You can even use this können as a main verb without a second verb, especially with languages. For example, kannst du Chinesisch? Do you know Chinese? In this context, a simple to know is the best translation. Number 3, a possibility or opportunity. Often translated as can, may, or might, this modality describes a possibility or the lack thereof that is enforced by nature or the situation itself. For instance, er kann keinen Job finden. He can't find a job. It's not that he's not capable enough or hasn't acquired the necessary knowledge, there is simply no opportunity to find a job. Hier kann schnell ein Gewitter aufziehen. A thunderstorm can quickly develop here. Es kann sein, dass krank ist. Literally, it can be that he is sick, but in English I would much rather prefer the sentence, he might be sick. Das kann nicht passieren. It's not possible for that to happen. Watch out. This one does not mean this can't be happening. It merely expresses the lack of a possibility, not disbelief. If you want to express that, revert to the phrase, das darf doch nicht wahr sein. Very dramatic and sounds supernatural. Number 4, an informal and direct permission or prohibition. Usually dürfen, which I'll cover a bit later in this video, is used for permission and prohibition. But if you want to sound more relaxed and less hierarchical, können is the way to go. Kann ich mitkommen? Can I come along? Or can I join you? Sie können sich auf meinen Platz setzen. You can take my seat. Here, dürfen would actually sound quite condescending because you still have the authority to stop somebody from doing something, but being the kind-hearted and well-intentioned person you are, you decided to give up that seat. The English counterpart of that would be, you are allowed to sit on my seat. Peasant. So etwas kannst du hier nicht sagen. You can't say stuff like that here. Du kannst nicht einfach weglaufen. You can't just run away. By the way, this is also the modality used in the joke I mentioned earlier. Kann ich auf Toilette gehen? Ich weiß nicht, ob du kannst, aber du darfst. Oh. Now, if you ever encounter a German saying stuff like that, you punch him in the face and say, modality, bitch, and then walk away. Anyway, let's move on to the modal verb müssen. Here's the conjugation. Ich muss, du musst, er sie es muss, wir müssen, ihr müsst, sie müssen. And the first modality it conveys is necessity. You can almost always translate this one as need to in English. For example, wir müssen den Code umschreiben. We need to rewrite the code. Sie müssen sich nach der Operation ausruhen. You need to rest after the surgery. Der Mensch muss nicht jeden Tag Fleisch essen. Humans don't need to eat meat every day. Wir müssen in 10 Minuten losgehen. We need to leave in 10 minutes. Number 2, obligation, duty, or coercion. While this modality can be used externally, it is most commonly self-imposed and conveys the inner feeling of having to do something. Common translations are have to, got to, or must, but be careful with the last one. Both müssen and must do express obligation, but for some inexplicable reason, if you negate must in English, so must not, the modality changes and it expresses prohibition. That does not happen in German. Nicht müssen is still about obligation, or rather the lack thereof, so you absolutely have to translate this one as to not have to. You will see what I mean in a second. Sie muss jeden Morgen 7 Uhr aufstehen. She has to get up at 7 every morning. Ich muss unbedingt mein Zimmer aufräumen. I really have to clean my room. Du musst nicht so formell sein. You don't have to be so formal. Die Kinder müssen keine Hausaufgaben machen. The children don't have to do any homework. If you want to express prohibition, that's where the next modal verb comes in handy. Dürfen. But let's talk about its conjugation first. Ich darf, du darfst, sie es darf, wir dürfen, ihr dürft, sie dürfen. Modality number 1, permission in positive clauses and prohibition in negative clauses. Du darfst hier alles sagen. You're allowed to say everything here. Darf man in diesem Restaurant rauchen? Is smoking allowed in this restaurant? Das Gewicht darf 20 Kilogramm nicht übersteigen. The weight must not exceed 20 kilograms. In diesem See darf man nicht schwimmen. It is prohibited to swim in this lake. And please don't confuse must not with nicht müssen. The only viable translation is nicht dürfen. Compare du musst das nicht machen, you don't have to do that, with du darfst das nicht machen, you must not do that, you're not allowed to do that. Number 2, social norms and moral boundaries. This modality is a bit more complex. It expresses some sort of limitation imposed either by society or our own moral principles. It's not a question of whether something is permitted or forbidden, but rather, do we dare or do we not? Wir dürfen niemals aufgeben. We must never surrender. Sexualität darf kein Tabuthema sein. Sexuality shouldn't be a taboo topic. Man darf nicht alles im Internet glauben. You shouldn't believe everything on the internet. Darf in so einer Situation ruhig wütend werden. He has every right to get angry in a situation like that. As you can see, especially from the last sentence, dürfen is quite powerful in German. Alright, it's time to talk about the 5th of the true modal verbs, sollen. In my opinion, the most difficult one to understand, but before we get into that, let's cover the conjugation. Ich soll, du sollst, sie es soll, wir sollen, ihr sollt, sie sollen. This modal verb only really has one usage, an instruction or recommendation from a third party. While müssen talks about the inner feeling of having to do something, sollen is more about you having to do something because you were told to. In order to get the difference across, I'll compare every sentence to one with müssen. Fortunately, English has a decent translation at its disposal, to be supposed to. Let's give it a try. Ich soll morgen früher zur Arbeit kommen. I'm supposed to show up at work earlier tomorrow, because my boss told me to. Compare that to, ich muss morgen früher zur Arbeit kommen. I have to show up at work earlier tomorrow because there's so much stuff to do. Sein Opa soll täglich 3 Tabletten nehmen. His grandpa is supposed to take 3 pills daily. That's what his doctor is recommending. Compare that to, sein Opa muss jeden Tag 3 Tabletten nehmen. His grandpa has to take 3 pills daily if he wants the pain to go away. Oh, was soll ich machen? What am I supposed to do? Sounds as if you're lost and need help urgently. Compare that to, was muss ich machen? What do I have to do? Sounds more straightforward and a clear call for instructions. And one last sentence, soll das so sein? Is it supposed to be like that? This is an appeal for somebody to check the situation. Compare that to, muss das so sein? Does it need to be like that? This expresses your own doubts about the situation, not necessarily relying on somebody else's opinion. Great, you've made it through the most difficult part. Let's get to the last of the 6 modal verbs, mögen. Now, mögen is kind of the odd one out because it used to be a standard modal verb and you can see that by looking at its conjugation. Ich mag, du magst, sie es mag, wir mögen, ihr mögt, sie mögen. Irregular singular, no third person T, everything fits. However, in real life you'll never really hear sentences like ich mag abends Bücher lesen. What you will hear though is ich mag es, abends Bücher zu lesen. So what's going on here? Well, mögen kinda lost its original meaning of to like doing something when it's used as a modal verb. So instead we have to use the following construction. Mögen plus es plus the rest of the sentence plus the zu infinitive. So instead of ich mag Kaffee trinken, you'd say ich mag es, Kaffee zu trinken. I like drinking coffee. And instead of ich mag nicht früh aufstehen, you'd say ich mag es nicht früh aufzustehen. I don't like getting up early. If you need more information on this mögen construction, which also includes lieben, to love, hassen, to hate, or genießen, to enjoy, you can click on this info card right here or check the link in the description as soon as the video is out. However, all of that does not mean that mögen has no modalities, just not the ones you think it has. The most common modality of mögen is actually this one, a friendly and informal question. Willst du einen Kaffee trinken sounds very straightforward and direct. There's a much better way to ask friendly questions. Magst du einen Kaffee trinken? Are you up for a coffee? Or in British English you could say, fancy a coffee? Magst du ihr kurz helfen? Do you mind helping her for a second? Magst du das selber machen? Do you want to do it yourself? This might be a question directed towards a toddler or a small child. Magst du mir von ihm erzählen? Do you mind telling me about him? Number 2, reluctance or resignation in negative clauses. While you can use to not like here, another very viable translation is to not feel like doing something anymore. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Ich mag nicht mehr im Büro arbeiten. I don't feel like working in the office anymore. Mag heute nichts essen. He doesn't feel like eating today. Mögen Sie keine Verantwortung mehr übernehmen? Don't you want to accept responsibility anymore? Or have you given up on accepting any responsibility? The translations are quite free here, but the sentence describes a typical hierarchical issue between an employee and their boss. Ihre Tochter mag keinen Film schauen. Her daughter is not in the mood to watch a movie. Having said that, what about the verb möchten? Well, this is actually just another verb form of mögen, the so-called Konjunktiv 2. The best translation is would like to, and it expresses a more polite way to say wollen. For example, ich möchte mich etwas entspannen. I would like to relax a bit. But since möchten isn't really a verb on its own, but is rather derived from mögen, I will cover it in my video about subjunctive modal verbs, which I'll link in this info card right here and in the description as well. Now, there's one last verb I quickly want to talk about, wissen. It is not considered a modal verb, although it is conjugated like one. Ich weiß, du weißt, sie es weiß, wir wissen, ihr wisst, sie wissen. But since you cannot say stuff like ich weiß das machen, but rather have to use a subordinate clause like ich weiß, wie man das macht, the most important indicator of modal verbs, modal verb plus infinitive, is not given. So just learn this verb as an irregular one, but never apply any modality to it. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you so much for sticking around until the end of the video. There's much more to say about modal verbs, but I'll cover all of that in the next lesson. If this video was useful to you, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if there's anything left unclear. See you next time, and until then, haut rein!